Good to have you here. This is Omni View, episode 124 for July 26, 2026. Multiple perspectives, one briefing. Here's the news, the perspectives, and where to look next. A looming super El Nino could cost African countries up to $20 billion and drive mass migration from drought-hit regions. The African Development Bank's top climate expert warned that an impending super El Nino could inflict between $10 billion and $20 billion in damages across affected countries and trigger large-scale migration from hard-hit areas. Forecasters link the risk to current Pacific Ocean warming trends that could produce one of the strongest El Nino events on record. The pattern typically brings severe droughts, flooding, and storms to parts of Africa, with direct threats to food production and infrastructure already identified in multiple nations. The African Development Bank frames the threat through its mandate to support economic resilience on the continent, highlighting how repeated weather shocks compound existing vulnerabilities in agriculture and infrastructure across regions dependent on rain-fed farming. Regional governments and aid agencies have begun contingency planning, though the scale of any response remains tied to the strength of the final weather pattern once Pacific temperatures are fully assessed. International climate funds have previously released emergency support after similar events, but disbursement speed and targeting have varied by country according to national absorption capacity and prior project pipelines. The South China Morning Post reports that the African Development Bank climate expert outlines projected costs and migration risks in detail. The Hindu International notes separate regional security developments that could interact with these economic pressures. African governments and the African Development Bank will monitor Pacific temperature data through the coming months to refine damage estimates and finalize aid allocations. Shifting now to a developing story in Southeast Asia. Thai forces have continued to dig in and construct barriers along the border with Cambodia, where a long-running dispute has prevented a lasting peace agreement. Officials on both sides have exchanged statements, but no new talks have produced concrete results, leaving troops in forward positions for an extended period. Thai military statements emphasize the need to secure territory amid stalled negotiations. Cambodian authorities have called for renewed dialogue to avoid escalation and maintain cross-border trade flows. Nikkei Asia reports details on military positioning and stalled diplomacy, along with a visual record of recent construction along the frontier. Regional observers note that both governments face domestic pressures that make compromise difficult, particularly when nationalist sentiments rise during periods of internal political debate. Border units on both sides will maintain current deployments while diplomats watch for any invitation to resume formal talks. Next, a statement from Iran on regional tensions. An Iranian army spokesman stated that renewed U.S. airstrikes, if undertaken at the urging of Israel, would cause the conflict to expand geographically. The comment was made on state television and referred to ongoing tensions in the region, with the spokesman noting that any resumption of strikes would broaden the geographic scope of fighting. Iranian military officials present the warning as a deterrent against further escalation. U.S. and Israeli statements have framed their actions as responses to prior attacks in the Red Sea and Gulf areas. The Hindu International carries the full statement from the Iranian army spokesman. The exchange occurs against a backdrop of already heightened naval and air activity in the Gulf and Red Sea, where shipping lanes remain under pressure from earlier incidents. Regional capitals will track any new movement of U.S. or Israeli forces and any corresponding Iranian deployments. Meanwhile, protests have broken out in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Demonstrations in Pakistan-administered Kashmir have highlighted local grievances over political representation and relations with Islamabad. Organizers say the unrest reflects a widening gap between residents and federal authorities, with protests coinciding directly with preparations for scheduled local elections. Local protest leaders argue that current governance arrangements limit genuine self-rule and reduce accountability to voters in the region. Pakistani officials maintain that existing structures protect the region's interests within the federation and ensure security coordination. The Christian Science Monitor reports on local demands and the federal response. The timing of the rallies coincides with preparations for local elections, raising questions about turnout and administrative logistics. Election authorities will decide whether to proceed with scheduled voting or adjust security and administrative plans in response to continued demonstrations. Turning to developments in technology and industry. The three companies announced a combined $700 billion initiative to expand AI data centers and memory production across South Korea and the United States. The plan includes new facilities and technology partnerships aimed at meeting rising global demand for advanced semiconductors. Company executives described the investment as a response to surging global demand for advanced chips. Governments in both countries have offered incentives to secure supply chains and reduce reliance on single-source production. Nikkei Asia provides a breakdown of investment amounts and locations. Industry analysts note that the scale of the commitment will require steady access to energy and skilled labor over the multi-year rollout period. In related economic news from the same region, South Korea's semiconductor sector has reported rising profits, yet overall employment figures have not kept pace with output gains. Officials are examining why revenue growth has not translated into broader hiring across the wider economy. Government economists point to automation and capital-intensive production methods as factors limiting new jobs even as chip exports climb. Labor groups call for policies that tie incentives more directly to employment creation in downstream industries. Nikkei Asia reports data on profits versus employment trends. The contrast has prompted debate over industrial strategy and the distribution of gains from high-value manufacturing. Now, some progress worth knowing about. Japanese authorities announced plans to increase the number of foreign workers admitted under legal channels at the same time as they intensify enforcement against visa overstays. The dual approach aims to address labor shortages in key sectors without expanding irregular migration. Business associations have welcomed the expanded intake as a way to fill roles in care, construction, and manufacturing, where domestic shortages have persisted for years. Immigration officials stress that stricter checks on overstayers will maintain public confidence in the system. Nikkei Asia outlines the new quotas and enforcement measures. The policy change requires coordination between multiple ministries responsible for labor, justice, and economic planning. Now, to really understand this story, there is something most coverage leaves out. Most reporting treats El Nino damage projections as straightforward predictions, yet the process involves several layers of modeling that many readers do not see. Climate agencies first track sea surface temperatures in the Central Pacific. When anomalies exceed a threshold for several months, they classify the event's strength. Those temperature readings then feed into regional rainfall and temperature models that African Development Bank economists combine with data on crop yields, infrastructure exposure, and population density. The resulting dollar figures represent an average across multiple possible weather outcomes rather than a single guaranteed total. Knowing this, when you hear a round number such as $20 billion, you can check whether the source has published the underlying temperature threshold or the specific sectors included in the calculation. Next time coverage cites an El Nino cost estimate, look for the date of the latest Pacific temperature update and whether the figure assumes a moderate or extreme scenario. If you want to go deeper on today's lead story, compare how the South China Morning Post and Nikkei Asia are covering it. You will see two different frames on the same facts. Tomorrow, watch for updates on whether Thai and Cambodian officials schedule new border talks. That wraps up today's Omni View. Remember, the best informed people read more than one perspective, and the calmest ones know that most days, somewhere, something is quietly getting better. For full source links, check out today's written briefing on the Omni View summaries page. Share this with someone who values fair coverage. See you tomorrow. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at Nara Network. Links in the show notes. And before you go, this show is part of the Nara Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets, each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen, SpaceX Daily. the daily companion for following SpaceX as a public company, from Starship to the stock ticker. Find every show free at naranetwork.com. And on the website, every episode's visuals live in our free image gallery at naranetwork.com/gallery. Royalty free under Creative Commons, download with attribution. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.